Tensions between Japan and China are escalating sharply over Taiwan. Tokyo has rejected Beijing's claims that its position has shifted even as China threatens resolute self-defense against Japan in a formal letter to the UN. Let's bring in our China correspondent Minmin. Minmin, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and Premier Li Qiang, they were in South Africa for G20. Were they engaged? To what extent were they able to talk?
Well, Takaichi was pretty much keeping her distance away from Premier Li. We knew ahead of the meeting that Premier Li, that China was not planning to speak or to organize a meeting between Li Qiang and Takaichi. And ahead of that as well, China had cancelled this trilateral meeting between the culture ministers of Japan, South Korea, and China that was slated to take place this week. And Takaichi was asked about, whether she had any chance to speak with China. She said there was no chance to do so, but she's not closing the door to dialogue. And in fact, Japan is still calling for dialogue and also dismissing China's claims that Japan is changing its position on Taiwan, calling it completely baseless. And this comes after China had submitted a letter to the UN in order to rally support for its position, saying that it's vowing to take resolute self-defense if Japan dares to intervene militarily. So tensions are escalating, and in the meantime, the Chinese embassy in Japan also wrote a text on X saying that China has the authority to defend itself without needing UN approval by citing this enemy status clause. But Japan saying that that clause is essentially obsolete by this point.
And Japan not backing down. The defense minister just visiting a military base close to Taiwan. What do we know?
Yes, Japan's defense minister is making his first visit to Yonaguni, which is an island just 100 kilometers to the east of Taiwan, a very strategic location. And he's saying that Japan will plan to deploy some missiles from that island. And we all know about Okinawa. That's the larger island further to the east that hosts a U.S. military base. And recently, a U.S. training has also deployed some of the supplies from Okinawa to Yonaguni. And of course, this is something that would potentially provoke China to perhaps also respond with its own military drills to the region. Now, Japan's defense minister said that this is something that would preemptively deter any military conflict in the region, dismissing any claims that it would destabilize peace in the region, but it's part of Japan's military buildup along the southern island chain.
Bloomberg China correspondent Minmin there. Let's actually discuss the diplomatic spat ongoing between Japan and China with Sheila Smith. She's Senior Fellow for Asia-Pacific Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Sheila, really good to have you with us. So we are seeing both sides coming out with very hardline policies. What is Prime Minister Takaichi's strategy here, given that she's not backing down?
No, and I think it's great to be with you as always. Takaichi made her remarks in the Japanese Diet in response to the questioning by an opposition party member. So the statement that she made was perhaps more clear about whether or not a Taiwan scenario would worry Japan or would lead for Japan to think about its own military acting at that point in time. But the policy is not new. It was interpreted and has become law in Japan's security legislation since 2015. But she is not in a position at home. She's in a minority government. Her party has had 2 setbacks electorally, but she is not in a position, I think, to compromise here. She basically stated Japanese policy, and now the Chinese are taking step by step to escalate. The Chinese government has asked for a retraction, but the chief cabinet secretary very quickly said that there is no reason to retract anything. To be clear here, I think it's really important that Japan, she did not say that Japan would use force against China. What she said was, independently, what she said was, if there's a scenario in which China uses force against Taiwan, then Japan would have to think about the consequences for Japan's defenses. And I think that's important to remember. She didn't say that Japan would militarily intervene in a Taiwan contingency, but she did say a Chinese use of force would cause Japan to consider its defense needs, right? So I don't know. I mean, I think the escalatory path is interesting to see. It's mostly economic at the moment, but the statement at the UN, for example, and Wang Yi's comments, I think, are suggesting that China may want to put even more pressure in even exercise, right?
Do you think such a diplomatic spat with China will actually help Takaichi's government? As you said, they're in the minority. They're not that strong, but you can see the opinion polls, Yomiuri poll just today being released. Takaichi cabinet approval rating 72%, Mainichi poll 65%. It always happens when you have a diplomatic spat, external issues, that you actually get a boost domestically. Given that Takaichi comes from a conservative side, can this help?
Well, it obviously is helping. And here's the thing to be that I think is important. Her approval rating when she became prime minister was very high. By some accounts, it was in the 80 percentile. Yomiuri had it just slightly lower than 80. Whether this spat was going to help or hinder her approval was not really clear to me anyway. But what you had was spot polling earlier in the week, earlier in the conflict, to basically say, did she do the right thing? Did she say the right thing? And 49% of the Japanese people said yes, which is very unusual given, as you may know, the Japanese hesitancy about use of force and making comments about the use of force. What these recent polls, and I'm glad you noted the Yomiuri poll in particular, what they reveal is actually she's getting a rebound of a positive rebound from the way she's handling this. So I think what this indicates is the Japanese public is not taking the Chinese response well. The economic sanctions have been on tourism to Japan. Well, a lot of Japanese think there's too many Chinese coming to Japan. The seafood products, I think there's been a sense that that's just been resolved and now there's a setback. So I think public opinion is a little bit on her side. That doesn't mean it's going to stay on her side. So the escalatory dynamics are important. Yeah.
Just wondering as well, do you think that all this is helping to boost maybe not just Takaichi, but also Japan's profile on the world stage and how they are engaging with other world leaders? I mean, you recall what we saw between her and Meloni as well.
Yes. So I don't really, that's a really great question. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I think she has captured the spotlight, Takaichi herself. She's had a really good meeting with the ASEAN leaders at the APEC summit, where she did meet President Xi. The Trump meeting, when President Trump went to Tokyo, went really well. And now at the G20, she seems to be holding her own. I think for Japan, they see themselves as the country who wants to defend the existing rules-based order. Their diplomacy is very focused on multilateralism, and they see China as challenging the current rules-based order. I think there will be support for her in some quarters, or for Japan writ large, but I'm not sure it's going to be uniformly across the globe that everybody will take Japan's side and not China's. But I think that both China and Japan are playing on the global stage now to demonstrate that their positions are the right positions, and this will unfold. I think I'm not sure how, but I think once we get close to either the threat of the use of force or a much more of ships go into the East China Sea, if you start to get that kind of dynamic to the tensions, then I think people will get worried, will get seriously worried.
As you say, now the tensions are mostly economic, and I guess at this stage it's also worth taking stock in how Japan under Takaichi's leadership has been engaging with the U.S. on economic and tariff policy. What do you think is the key thing that's going to shape their relations going forward?
Well, I think, clearly the tariff deal was negotiated by her predecessor, Prime Minister Ishiba, but the gentleman who negotiated it is now in the cabinet. So there's continuity on the Takaichi position on the U.S. And the idea and the visit of Trump to Tokyo produced several documents, cooperation on rare earth and critical mineral supply chains, on scientific innovation, next generation technology. So you see that the relationship is focused on these economic dimensions, but shifting it over a little bit to economic security kinds of priorities. I think she's going to be very consistent. The U.S.-Japan alliance is very, very important to Japan. And I think during the Trump visit, you also saw the two of them on the U.S. aircraft carrier that's home ported in Yokosuka. So we're going to see more of this kind of idea that the U.S.-Japan alliance will be stronger than ever under Takaichi.